the family gathering where my cousin announced he'd handled the sale of our grandmother's land, he stood by the fireplace, calm and satisfied, and said, "It's done. I sold the property. Grandma signed off on it herself, so there's nothing anyone needs to worry about. The money will be split fairly, and honestly, none of us were using that land anyway." 20 relatives murmured, some relieved, some uneasy, and I stood up and said, "That's interesting, Anton. Because on the date you say Grandma signed the sale, she was in the hospital, unable to hold a pen or recognize her own children. So I'd like to know whose hand actually signed her name." The satisfied look slid off my cousin's face like water off glass. Let me back up. Because to understand why I knew, to the day, that our grandmother could not have signed anything, you have to understand the land, and the woman who left it to us, and the cousin who decided that 90 years of family history was worth less than a developer's check. My name is Renata Duarte. I'm 39 years old, and my cousin forged our dying grandmother's signature to sell the piece of land our family had held for 3 generations, the land that was our history, our gathering place. The one thing that still made us a family, and he nearly got away with it because he was confident, and because everyone assumed the paperwork was real, and because no one else knew what I knew about the day he claimed she signed. Let me tell you about the land first, because you cannot understand the crime without understanding what was stolen. My great-grandparents bought it almost 90 years ago, a stretch of rural land, a few acres, with an old farmhouse and a stand of oak trees and a creek that ran along the back edge. It wasn't valuable in the way of money, not for most of those 90 years. It was valuable in the way of roots. It was where the family gathered. Every holiday, every summer, every wedding and funeral and reunion for 3 generations happened on that land. My mother grew up running through those oaks. I grew up running through them. My childhood, and my mother's and her mother's, was soaked into that ground. It was the one fixed point in a family that had otherwise scattered across cities and states, the place we all came back to, the thing that reminded us we belonged to each other. And it belonged, in these last years, to my grandmother, Inez. Grandma Inez was the matriarch, the keeper of the land and the keeper of the family. Her parents had bought it, she'd inherited it, and she held it not as a possession but as a trust, something she was keeping for all of us for the generations coming. She used to say, sitting on the farmhouse porch under the oaks, "This land isn't mine, it's ours. I'm just the one holding it right now. And when I'm gone, it stays ours, all of you together. That's the whole point. It's the thing that keeps you a family after I can't." She meant it as a blessing. She never imagined it could become a target. I want to give you one specific afternoon on that porch, because I've carried it my whole life, and it's the thing that steadied me when everything got hard. I was maybe 12, and I'd asked Grandma why she didn't just sell some of the land. A developer had come sniffing around even then, and I'd overheard the adults talk about how much money it might be worth. And Grandma pulled me down beside her on the porch swing, and she was quiet for a while, looking out at the oaks, and then she said, "Renata, let me tell you what money is. Money is a way of turning something into nothing. You take a thing that's alive, this land, these trees, your great-grandmother's whole life, every holiday this family ever had, and you turn it into a number in a bank, and then the number gets spent, and in a year it's gone and the land is gone too. You have nothing, not the money, not the land, not the place your family comes home to, nothing." She'd squeezed my hand. "Some people can only see the number. They look at these oaks and they see dollars. I feel sorry for them because they'll spend their whole lives turning living things into nothing and never understand why they always feel empty. Don't be one of them, Mija. Hold the living thing. The number's a lie. The land is real." I was 12. I didn't fully understand it, but it lodged in me, and 30 years later, when a man in my own family looked at those same oaks and saw only the number, I understood exactly what Grandma had been warning me about, and exactly what she'd been asking me to protect. Because the land, in recent years, had finally become worth money, real money. The area had developed, and our few rural acres, which had been worth little for most of a century, were suddenly worth a great deal to developers who wanted to build. And where there is suddenly money, there is suddenly someone in the family who sees the roots and thinks only of the check. That someone was my cousin Anton. Let me tell you about Anton, and be fair about him, because he wasn't a cartoon. Anton was the ambitious one, the one who'd always felt the family was beneath his aspirations, the one perpetually chasing a bigger life and perpetually short of the cattle to fund it. He looked at Grandma's land, at 90 years of family history under those oaks, and he did not see roots. He saw an underperforming asset. He saw money sitting idle in dirt and sentiment. And as Grandma Inez aged and declined, Anton began quietly to see an opportunity. Here is what was happening with Grandma, and it matters enormously to the crime. In her last couple of years, Inez declined, first her body, then, heartbreakingly, her mind. She developed a form of dementia that progressed that stole her clarity in patches and then in stretches. Till by the end, she had good days and bad days, and then mostly bad days, when she couldn't hold a pen, couldn't follow a conversation, couldn't reliably recognize her own children and grandchildren. Watching Inez fade was watching the family lose its center in slow motion. And Anton watched that decline the way a thief watches a house go dark. Because a matriarch who owns valuable land and is losing the capacity to manage it is, to a certain kind of person, not a grandmother to be cared for. She's an obstacle becoming an opportunity. Now let me tell you about the subplot that put me in a position to catch him, because I was close to Grandma in her final years, closer than most, and that closeness is what made me the one person who could expose the forgery. I was one of Grandma's primary visitors in her decline. Not her legal caretaker, that role was more diffuse, shared and contested in the way these things get in big families, but I was there, constantly, because I loved her and because someone had to be. I visited her in her home and then, as she declined further in care, I knew her condition intimately. I knew day to day what she could and couldn't do. I kept without thinking of it as evidence, a kind of running awareness of her state, because when you love someone fading, you track every flicker, every good day, every loss. And I was close, too, with one other cousin who genuinely loved the land and Grandma the way I did. My cousin Marisol, who becomes important later. The one other person in the family who saw the land as roots rather than resource. Marisol and I were the keepers of Grandma's actual wishes, the two who'd sat on the porch and heard her say, again and again, "It stays ours, all of you together." Here's how the crime unfolded. Anton, over Grandma's final year, positioned himself. He inserted himself into her affairs, made himself useful with paperwork, presented himself to the scattered family as the one handling Grandma's business so no one else had to. And because most of the family was distant and busy and grateful for someone to take the burden, no one looked too closely at what Anton was actually doing with the access he'd gathered. What he was doing was arranging to sell the land. He found a developer. He negotiated a price, and he prepared the paperwork to transfer our family's 90-year heart into a stranger's hands and the proceeds. Well, he said the proceeds would be split fairly, but I had my doubts about that too. There was only one problem for Anton. The land was Grandma's, and selling it required Grandma's signature, and Grandma, by the time Anton had the sale ready, was no longer capable of signing anything or understanding what a signature meant. So Anton forged it. He drew up the sale, and on the line where Inez Duarte was supposed to sign, the woman who'd called the land ours, who'd held it in trust for all of us, who by then couldn't reliably hold a spoon, Anton put her signature. Whether he traced it, copied it, or simply scrawled an approximation and dared anyone to question it, I didn't know at first. But he signed our grandmother's name to the sale of our grandmother's land, at a time when our grandmother could not have signed her own name, and he did it because he was certain no one would check. And then Grandma Inez died, which Anton surely thought made him safe, because now the one person who could definitively say I never signed that was gone. Let me tell you how I found out, and about the midpoint, the moment I was told there was nothing to be done. It came out at a family gathering after the funeral, when Anton, satisfied and confident, announced that he'd handled the sale of the land. Announced it as a done deal, a fait accompli, framed as him having taken care of tedious business on everyone's behalf. It's done. Grandma signed off herself. The money will be split fairly. None of us were really using the land anyway. The room's reaction was mixed. Some relatives distant from the land were mildly relieved at an unexpected inheritance, others who felt the loss of the gathering place were uneasy, but assumed it was legitimate because Anton said Grandma had signed. And why would you doubt that a grandmother signed her own land sale? I doubted instantly and completely for one reason. I knew when Anton claimed she'd signed, and I knew where Grandma had been that day. Because I tracked her condition, because I visited constantly, I knew the date on that sale corresponded to a period when Grandma was in the hospital, deep in her decline, unable to hold a pen or recognize her own family. She could not have signed it. It was physically and cognitively impossible, which meant the signature was forged, which meant Anton had committed a serious crime, which meant the sale of our family's 90-year heart was built on a forgery. But knowing and proving are different things, and when I first raised it, carefully, privately with a few family members, I hit the wall that these schemes rely on. I was told to let it go. The sale was already done. Grandma was gone, the land was sold, the money was coming. What was the point of dragging the family through an ugly accusation against Anton over land none of us were using anyway? Even relatives who found Anton distasteful didn't want the conflict. The path of least resistance was to accept the done deal and take the money. And Anton counted on exactly that, on the family's conflict aversion, on the finality of a completed sale, on the difficulty of unwinding something already signed and closed. There was a moment I nearly accepted it. I want to be honest about that. The pressure to just let it go was enormous, and fighting it meant accusing my own cousin of forging our dead grandmother's signature, an ugly, family-shattering accusation, and possibly failing, and being the one who tore the family apart over land. I sat with that temptation, take the check, keep the peace, let Grandma's land go, and then I thought about Grandma on the porch. It stays ours, all of you together. That's the thing that keeps you a family after I can't. And I understood that Anton hadn't just stolen land. He'd stolen the one thing that kept us a family, and he'd forged the hand of the woman who'd spent her life protecting exactly that. If I let it go, I wouldn't be keeping the peace. I'd be ratifying the theft of my grandmother's last wish and her very signature. I would not do it. Grandma had held that land in trust for us. Now I would. Here is what I did. First, I nailed down the timeline because the timeline was everything. I gathered the documentation of Grandma's hospitalization and condition on the date of the signing, medical records, admission dates, the documented reality of her cognitive and physical state. I established, beyond question, that on the day Inez Duarte supposedly signed a complex land sale, she was hospitalized and incapable of signing or understanding anything. The date on Anton's document was, itself, the beginning of his undoing. Second, I brought in the evidence that would make it undeniable, a professional document examiner, because I didn't just want to argue that Grandma couldn't have signed, I wanted to prove the signature wasn't hers. I obtained genuine examples of Grandma's actual signature from years of documents, and had a forensic document examiner compare them to the signature on the sale. And the examiner's conclusion was clear. The signature on the sale was not consistent with Inez Duarte's genuine signature. It showed the hallmarks of a forgery, a hand imitating hers rather than hers. Third, I found my ally. I went to Marisol, the cousin who'd loved the land and Grandma as I did, and I told her what I'd found. I sat at her kitchen table, and I laid it out: the date, the hospital records, my suspicion of the forgery, and I watched Marisol's face change from grief to something harder. And then she said, "Renata, I have to tell you something I've been sitting on because I thought I was just being paranoid, and I felt guilty for suspecting family. But now," she got up, went to a drawer, and came back with her phone. "About 8 months ago, before Grandma got really bad, I stopped by the care home to visit her unannounced. And Anton was there, in her room, with papers. Grandma was having one of her worst days. She didn't know me. She was confused. She kept asking for her mother, who'd been dead for 40 years. And Anton was sitting there with documents and a pen, and when I walked in, he got flustered. Fast. He gathered the papers up and said he was just going over some financial things with her. And I remember thinking, she can't go over anything today. She doesn't know what year it is. But I told myself he was just handling business. I told myself I was being suspicious for no reason. She looked at me. He was practicing, wasn't he, or getting her to make marks he could use, on a day she didn't know her own name. I saw it, Renata. I saw him doing it, and I talked myself out of what I was seeing because he was family, and it was easier. I took her hand. "You're not paranoid, you're a witness," because that was exactly what Marisol was. She'd seen Anton alone with Grandma and documents on a day Grandma was incapable. She could place him with the paperwork, in the room, exploiting Grandma's worst state, months before the forged sale surfaced. Marisol, it turned out, had her own piece of the puzzle. She'd been suspicious of Anton's sudden control over Grandma's affairs for a long time, and she remembered specific conversations, specific instances of Anton maneuvering that corroborated the pattern. And she carried the same guilt so many witnesses carry, the guilt of having seen something wrong and talked herself out of it because the wrongdoer was family. Together, we had the timeline, the forensic analysis, and a witness to Anton's positioning. Together, we were formidable. And Marisol, freed of the guilt of her silence, was fierce, because there's no ally like someone who's ashamed of how long they stayed quiet. Fourth, I consulted a lawyer, a real estate and estate attorney, who told me what I needed to hear: that a land sale executed with a forged signature is void, not merely voidable, that it can be unwound, that forging a signature to sell property is a serious crime. And that the developer, once informed that the seller's signature was forged, would want no part of a fraudulent transaction. The sale that Anton had presented as final, done, unwindable, was in fact built on a forgery that, once proven, would collapse the entire thing. Now, the reckoning. I chose to do it the way these things have to be done. In front of the family, all at once, so Anton couldn't pick us off with the let-it-go pressure, and so the whole family would understand what he'd actually done. At the next gathering, Anton again held court about the completed sale, the money coming, the tedious business he'd handled. And I stood up. "That's interesting, Anton," I said. "Because on the date you say Grandma signed the sale, she was in the hospital, unable to hold a pen or recognize her own children. So I'd like to know whose hand actually signed her name." The room went silent. Anton's confidence flickered. "I have Grandma's hospital records from that date," I said, laying them out. "She was admitted in decline, incapable of signing a document or understanding what one was. She could not have signed the sale. It's not possible." I laid out the next document. And I had a forensic document examiner compare the signature on the sale to years of Grandma's genuine signatures. The examiner's conclusion is that the signature on your sale is not hers, that it shows the characteristics of a forgery. Someone signed Grandma's name to the sale of her land on a day she was in the hospital and couldn't sign anything. I think everyone here can guess who, since you're the one who handled the paperwork. Anton went for bluster, that I was being ridiculous, that I was accusing him of a crime, that the sale was legitimate, that I was tearing the family apart. But Marisol stood up beside me. "I watched you take over Grandma's affairs this past year, Anton," she said. "I watched you make yourself the one handling everything so no one else would look. And I sat on that porch with Grandma, same as Renata, and heard her say 100 times that the land was to stay ours, all of us together. She would never have sold it. She couldn't have signed it, and now we have proof the signature isn't even hers. So stop talking about tearing the family apart. You tore it apart when you forged a dead woman's name to sell the ground she held for all of us. Here is how it ended." The forgery, once documented, was undeniable, and it collapsed everything. Faced with the hospital records proving Grandma couldn't have signed, and a forensic examiner's finding that the signature was forged, Anton had no defense. The sale was void. A forged signature conveys nothing. And once the developer was informed that the seller's signature had been forged, they withdrew immediately, wanting nothing to do with a fraudulent transaction and a property with a clouded title. The land came back to the family, to the estate, where it belonged. Anton faced consequences beyond the collapse of his scheme. Forging a signature to sell property is a serious crime, forgery, fraud, and there was real legal exposure. I won't detail the process, because it's painful and it's family, but I'll say that Anton did not walk away untouched, and that the family, once they understood he'd forged Grandma's name, turned from him almost completely. There's little a family forgives less than the desecration of its matriarch's signature and its shared history. Here's the part that matters most, the part that honors Grandma. Marisol and I, having saved the land, made sure it could never be stolen again. We worked with the estate and the lawyer to place the land where Grandma had always wanted it, in a proper trust, held for the whole family, for the generations coming, with real legal protections against any future Anton. Grandma had held the land in trust in her heart, informally, on a handshake and a porch promise. We made that trust real on paper, legally armored, so that the land would stay ours, all of us, together, exactly as she'd said, and so that no one could ever again forge or maneuver or scheme it away. The land is still ours. The oaks still stand. Creek still runs along the back edge. And the family still gathers there, on the porch where Grandma used to sit and call it ours. A little smaller now, without Anton, but truer, bound by the thing Grandma always said the land was for, keeping us a family after she couldn't. Anton is gone from that porch, by his own doing. He never apologized. He experienced the exposure as my betrayal of him rather than his betrayal of all of us, which is how people like Anton experience every consequence. He looked at 90 years of roots and seen only a check, and in the end he got neither the check nor the family, which is the exact justice of it. He valued the money over the roots, and he lost both, and kept nothing. Marisol is the ally I'll be grateful for always, the one other cousin who saw the land as roots, who'd been quietly suspicious for months, who stood up beside me when standing up meant accusing family. We're the keepers of the land now, she and I, the way Grandma was holding it for everyone, protecting it for the generations coming. For 90 years, our family held a piece of land that was less a possession than a soul, the place we gathered, the roots that kept us a family across 3 generations. And my cousin forged our dying grandmother's signature to sell it, certain that no one would check, certain that a dead matriarch couldn't testify, certain that the family's aversion to conflict would let him keep the money and the land go. He forgot one thing. He forgot that when you love someone who's fading, you track every day of it, every good day, and every lost one. He forged Grandma's name on a day I knew, to the certainty of medical record, that she was in a hospital bed unable to hold a pen. He built his whole crime on a signature she could not have made, on a date that proved his lie the moment anyone bothered to check it. Grandma spent her life saying the land wasn't hers, that she was just the one holding it, keeping it for all of us for after she was gone. She was right, in a way she never intended. She held it and then she couldn't, and for a moment a thief nearly took it in her fading name. But she'd also raised granddaughters who listened when she sat on that porch and said it stays ours. And when the moment came, we did exactly what she'd taught us. We held the land, we kept it ours. All of us together, the way she always said, the way it always should be, the way it still is under the same oaks on the same ground, in a family that a forger tried and failed to rob of its own roots. Grandma couldn't sign that day. But her granddaughters could stand up, and we did.